Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next session, Risky Business, of how St James's Place managed a successful PAM project, or Privileged Access Management for short. I'm Kevin Arrowsmith, I'm a director at Turnkey, and I am delighted to be joined by our next guest speaker, Matthew Smith, Director of Cyber and Information Security at St James's Place. So rather than butchering his introduction, I think maybe hand over. Matt, do you want to tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis at SJP?
Hi, Kev. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess my role at SJP, I've been with the organisation about 6 years. I came in primarily to look at operations and how we do kind of operational security. I own all our kind of our BAU capability around incident response, forensics, server infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. But more recently, I've obviously taken up responsibility for kind of our broader information security program, driving the the transformation and change, and ultimately making sure what we're doing in security is aligning to our broader kind of business risk appetite and our broader kind of goals and objectives as a business.
Thanks for that, Matt. So, good introduction there. So, what are we going to be covering off today? So, just how have they been able to successfully implement privileged access management? So first of all, Matt's going to cover off who St James's Place and what they do, and ultimately why cybersecurity is so important for SJP and their partners. Then we're going to be diving into a little bit more of a detailed exploration of what PAM is, where it fits, the risks that they address, and then cover off how the implementation essentially was underway at SJP, and that some of the pitfalls perhaps that may or may not have come about, and essentially how you can avoid some of those common pitfalls in privileged access management. So I think we've got a fantastic agenda for this session. So how the style is going to be, it's very much a Q&A led. So I'm going to be asking Matt for some of his viewpoints, and ultimately we can tune in and see how SJP navigated. But importantly, if you've got any questions at all that you'd like to ask, please feel free to pop them into the stage Q&A. I'll be trying to pick out these, but we do have a little bit of a section towards the end where we'll try and cover off any questions and answers. So anything burning in privileged access management, then please feel free, fire them in, and we'll try and get through them as quick as we can. So Matt, if you're ready for the first question, who is SJP? And why is cybersecurity so important to the way that you and the business operates?
Yeah, thanks, Gab. So I think just a little bit of background as to who we are SJP as a business. We're sort of one of those almost those hidden large organisations really in terms of the UK. So we're a FTSE 100 financial services organisation. We have just under 1 million clients with us. They're primarily consumers. Although we do some kind of pension fund and other kind of administration. But primarily what we do is we provide financial advisory services to end users. We do that through our franchise or wider network of SJP advisors, our partners. We have over sort of 3,000 partners in the UK that are own businesses, and they effectively operate and sort of communicate our financial service product and provide advice under the SJP banner. We have around £150 billion of fund under management, so we're a pretty large financial services organisation, and that's really why, on your second part of your question, why cybersecurity is so important to us. We are an important part of the UK economy. We're an important part of people's long-term saving and investments, and ultimately that means that our cyber strategy is really, really critical to make sure that we support what the business is doing and what we're delivering to our end users, our clients, our customers, but also making sure that we're taking all the appropriate controls and all the appropriate steps you would expect of a financial services organisation to make sure actually we're protecting client data, we're protecting those funds that are under management, and we're making sure that as a business we're operating as securely as possibly we can.
I think that puts it into context, just the size of risk that trying to sort of respond to and control here. So that leads me on to a very good, hopefully a good question next, which is, so SJP terms, maybe your own personal terms, what is privileged access management, and where does it fit within an organisation's IAM journey?
I think the sort of the meat of our conversation is coming up a little bit later in our journey, because I think I really want to illustrate where we've made some mistakes and potentially actually not necessarily put PAM in the center of the IAM journey. I think if I talk about it today, I think PAM is absolutely critical to IAM. You cannot really consider your IAM journey without thinking about your PAM journey. It needs to be very much brought in line with what you're doing centrally around kind of your JML processes, how you're managing identity within the organization. It's really key to bring them together. So for me, in terms of, I guess, going back a bit, but defining PAM is obviously how you manage access, whether it's your underlying kind of VMware infrastructure, whether it's your AWS infrastructure, whether it's even higher level stuff where you're managing access into SaaS applications or application control. Ultimately, wherever you're assigning privilege to an individual or a system or an integration point, that's privileged access, and it needs to be managed effectively across your organization. And that's why I say, and this is benefit of hindsight in our own journey, is it's so critical to think of it in the context of your IAM journey, because PAM cannot be considered in isolation. If you think of it in isolation, you don't necessarily put around the robust processes and the capabilities and the services that you need in order to manage it effectively.
It's a very good set of points on that one. So the next question that we have, and I think this is a really important one, just to try to contextualize the risk aspect. I'm sure you're going to be touching upon the technical journey of PAM, but trying to think about the risk side. So the next question we have: what is the business risk addressed through PAM, and why is it needed?
I think the first point of clarification is that actually we need to make sure we don't think of PAM as a tool and technology and a capability and implementation. That's one of the mistakes we made on our journey. But it's about thinking about what contextually are we doing with that solution. That means we're going to address some of the business risks identified through having privileged access in the organization. Every organization has privileged access of some form. If we think about the kind of how I see it in the cyber world, how I see it in the kind of the incident response and everything we do technically, is privileged access and identities in general are always abused in any kind of compromise. So whether that's a ransomware attack, whether that's data compromise, whether it's insider threat, it's all generally around using identity or privileged identity in a way that wasn't intended. And so that's absolutely what we're trying to address when we bring in the PAM solution. We're trying to think about, actually, it's not just the technical capability to make sure we've got great controls around our root accounts into really key business systems. It's just about thinking about how do we want to manage those privileged rights within the organization so we can monitor and measure and identify when they're being misused and when they're being used incorrectly. And that's really, for me, where the business risk is being addressed, is by implementing a proper program around PAM, about implementing robust capabilities and services around PAM, so it integrates with your IAM, so it integrates with your JML processes. Actually, that's how you start addressing the business risks, which is ultimately managing your privileged access consistently with the organization, so you can monitor for deviations, so you can respond to any kind of abuse, and so you can make sure actually you're minimizing that attack surface in the first place.
So I think that's a really good point, and I'm just going to pick up there actually on that point around trying to treat this as a journey to go through. Not right at the very start of your answer, you talked about not treating it as tooling or trying to look at just the tooling and the technology. I think the simple word of using it is this is change management. You're changing the processes, you're changing the technology, and so as a result, the business needs to change. So just to expand on that, it's a really good set of answers that you gave around that. So moving on to our next question that we have. So I suspect this could be quite a long journey on this one, Matt. So what's the journey SJP has taken on PAM?
I think this is hopefully the when we talked about this earlier, is really a useful bit, because if I came to one of these sessions, I'm always really interested to see what have other organizations done, what are the problems that they faced, what can I learn from, and what can I make sure I don't do in my program. And for us, PAM has actually been a really long journey because we made quite a few mistakes along the way. And we started it in 2017, and we sort of treated it like any other kind of technology engagement, where you need antivirus, you need firewalls, you need EDR, whatever that tool is. You look at the Gartner analysis, you look at market analysis, and you go pick a vendor, and then you go work with that vendor to implement the solution. You might make some process changes, you might make some adjustments to services, but ultimately it's a technology-led implementation. And that was really our first mistake. We went out there, we got a top quartile PAM solution, and we went straight into kind of letting the vendor lead us. So, by letting the vendor lead us, we effectively went down this road of get this capability in place, minimize threats and risk to high privileged accounts. But we didn't think about the whole picture. We didn't think about how we're going to sustain this service beyond the support of the project. How are we going to make sure actually that there aren't any workarounds to what we implement through the project and through the kind of the vendor implementation. So we didn't really think about the journey. We didn't really think about actually how we're going to sustain this post project. And the result was that we ended up with a great technical implementation, highly resilient, meeting all our operational kind of performance indicators, but a solution ultimately that wasn't well integrated into the business and certainly wasn't well understood. We didn't resource it on our side enough. And the other bit I found from kind of letting it be led by vendors was you tend to boil the ocean. You tend to get into conversations that don't necessarily need to happen early on in the project. So we started, and I'll give a prime example because I think most vendors will do this, and I don't mean to bash vendors, but most vendors want to run a discovery tool, and that's great. That gives you a bit of a kind of what's your surface, what's your kind of attack surface, what are you working with, what do we need to onboard, how do we prioritize it? But those tools can actually take quite a while to get running, and even when you get them running and you get to look at all your accounts, you can be looking at thousands, hundreds of accounts, hundreds of services, and ultimately that means going to talk to lots of different stakeholders to try and work out what's a process that we can agree that's going to work to put you into the PAM solution or to integrate you into how we want to operate privileged access. Do you really need to do that as an exercise up front? I would say no. I think you need to be a bit more focused around actually what do we need to achieve, what's our first deliverable, what do we want to get out the door first, and what can we set up almost as a template or a process that's flexible but ultimately allows us to piecemeal roll out. So actually you sort of a bit like an agile deployment, you iterate through capability rather than trying to look at the whole picture, because otherwise you end up having quite interesting but quite hypothetical conversations about architecture and best practice and how we can tackle this consistently across all these different account types. So that was really our first kind of foray into it, and based on some of those mistakes and some of those sort of lack of support things that we put in place, it really got quite a bad reputation internally. I sort of repicked the project up and decided actually we need to reinvest in this. We've clearly not delivered on the objectives and necessarily all the risk mitigation that we wanted from the solution. And we picked it back up, and again, we made a bit of a mistake. We brought in an architect and technical expert in PAM because we thought actually what we were missing was letting the solution be led by a supplier and not having our own expertise internally into how to design PAM and how to integrate it. And that again caused us to go in a slightly wrong tangent. So we spent a bit of time really looking at how can we build an incredibly secure, how can we integrate really, really well with our systems. And we did that because ultimately we brought someone in to lead the project that was very kind of solution focused, was very kind of capability focused. And again, we didn't put enough time, we didn't put enough kind of money, people, resource into how do we want to operate this, how do we want to integrate it into BAU teams. And that's where we really hit the other stumbling blocks, was we didn't bring operations with us. For the most part, you can implement your security kind of controls and objectives relatively simply through kind of normal IT change management. But when you're changing how operational teams perform their day-to-day duties, you need to to bring those teams along with you. And it can be very much a heart and mind exercise and not necessarily a platform exercise, because everyone can think of reasons as to why it's not necessarily the perfect solution. You know, any implementation of a PAM capability might be less optimal in some scenarios and more optimal in others. So you've really got to bring people with you. That was another lesson we learned. And you've also got to stop thinking about it as a tool and a solution. And that brings me to a good point. And I know it's not Kevin didn't ask me to plug Turnkey, but that is really what happened there. Is we had those kind of two projects, bit of false starts, and I think around 2020, or maybe early last year, 2021, Kevin and I kind of spoke about actually we're having difficulty really making PAM stick in our organisation. I think we need to approach it in a different way. And that's where I sort of set out and I made a commitment to our kind of executive sponsors that actually we're going to wipe the slate. We're going to start again. We're going to put a 3-year program in that actually says we're not walking away from this implementation, not handing over to any BAU teams until I'm 100% satisfied that we've integrated it, that we can monitor it effectively, and we can kind of demonstrate that we can onboard and adapt to change. So whether we buy new platforms or we integrate new systems. So we set up a 3-year program. We partnered with an organization, Turnkey, to help us deliver that. And what we built was a full project team. So not just led by one expert or a couple of experts in the vendor and the solution provider. We built a whole team. So through business analysts, through technical architects, project management, resourcing internal teams to kind of manage the solution long term, and then really working with our internal stakeholders, technology teams, platform owners, all those things to design a target operating model. And that's really key, because what we did with Turnkey is we sort of did a bit of a forensic review of what went wrong. What do we need to make sure we're doing this time when we're approaching the solution is to be successful? And I'm really pleased, we're still on that journey, we're still implementing it, but what we're doing is delivering agile and delivering piecemeal capability improvements that's significantly reducing our operational risk. So I'm really comfortable where we are in terms of our project and program now. But I think that's some of the key learnings, and I think we'll touch on your next question and prompt.
No, I think we will. But I just want to say thanks very much for sharing quite an honest view of the journey that you've taken. I'm sure some organisations will possibly have followed some of the same steps, but it's really good to talk about it just so that anyone who's about to embark can try and avoid some of those things as well. But let's go on to the next question before we start throwing out the wider Q&A and see what's come in. So you've touched on quite a few already, Matt. So recommendations for ensuring a successful outcome on a PAM project. So I guess summarise some of these for us.
I think for me it goes back to that first question you asked me, Calvin, or the second question around identity and access management, and aligning with your IAM. You have to think about PAM not as a tool, and that was one of the things we did quite early on when we engaged and we brought Turnkey on board to help us. Is we changed the language. PAM is not a tool. It is not implementing a vendor capability and mitigating and adding some controls to your privileged access. If you do that, you're ultimately probably on a path to failure and not really integrating into BAU. So you have to think about, how do I want to manage PAM long term? How do I want people to request privileged access? Can I do it as part of my normal JML processes? How do I want to integrate them? So for us, PAM is actually 3 technologies. We have a PAM tool. That's a capability that we proxy certain access through. But we also have a service management tool for all kind of requests for access and changes and movers and levers. And then we have an overarching orchestration tool that effectively takes those service requests and either provides you access to our PAM tool or provides you access to other mechanisms. And the critical thing there is, as an operational team, we've all aligned, we've all agreed, that's our target state. These are the 3 capabilities we use to manage privileged access. and we've been on a journey to make sure actually we just move ourselves to that target state. So for me, that's the biggest thing, is don't think of PAM as a tool. Think about it as, how is it going to work in your organization? How are you going to support it as a service? Because it is business change, as you say. You're changing how you're operating, not just implementing a capability. And then I think I've highlighted a couple of the other kind of, things that you can trip yourself up. But I think it's, the other one I think is remove workarounds. I've said don't start a journey with a tool, but also it's when you get to that capability, once you've effectively built something sustainable in your PAM solution, it's making sure then your operational teams are building the capability to monitor for deviations. And I give an example, is we have a capability that effectively provisions access. We've all agreed as an organization, as a technology organization, that is the only way access is ever granted to certain groups. So any activity to provision access outside of that is not right. And straight away, once we started implementing that, once we'd agreed to that position, we started picking up effectively bad practice and stuff that shouldn't be happening in the organization. And it's great because we've all agreed, because we've all aligned that's not how it should happen. We're able to just sort of stop that out, make sure everything was just being done the way we wanted it to be done. But it's really important, I think, and we had it really early on in some of our implementation, is make sure you know and make sure you can agree what's the way that things should be operated. And therefore your operational team, certainly my kind of security team, can therefore create the rules, create the monitoring, and create the capability to sort of detect deviations. And ultimately those deviations are the interesting activity potentially that you want the team to be able to look into as well.
I think they're a really, really good set of sort of final outcome or final recommendations, should I say. So again, thanks for sharing a lot of that, Matt. So let's just have a look. I think we're just coming up to some of the Q&A section now. So bear with me just while I pull some of these up. Okay, yeah, so we've got 3 questions. Okay, we've got one, and I'm going to slightly save and maybe swerve this one away. Feel free to chip in if you like, Matt. But what is the PAM technology SJP currently uses? I'm going to come straight in on this one and do a quick initial thing. So one of the challenges around PAM, and especially what Matt was talking about, implementing it as the vendor technology, and treating it as a tool to implement rather than going on the change journey. One of the challenges here is if it ultimately fails, that tooling becomes a little bit of a swear word within the organization. So Matt, I don't know whether you wanted to specifically name anybody or whether you wanted to just interject. Entirely up to you.
No, and I think for me, I wouldn't necessarily name vendors. I think they're all of a similar capability when you're looking at the top quartile as we were. I think the main point I come back to is don't think of PAM as a tool. Think of it about what are the capabilities, whether that's technology, whether it's people and process that you need to operate privileged access successfully in the organization, and that is your PAM. That is your PAM capability, is making sure that it aligns to those objectives. And almost the tooling becomes almost the secondary thought. That's very much there to implement specific technical controls or mitigations that you want. But that's almost at the end of the line, which I know is a strange way to think about it, but actually that's the way, if you want to be effective in kind of implementation, is the tools there really just to do the control additions that you really need. You've got to think about the kind of the bigger picture.
It's the people and the processes, and then the technology part is the engine underneath that powers that accelerates that for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so next question we've got. I'm just going to go to the latest question that came in first. What is the actual risk mitigation you think you have achieved in deploying PAM?
I think this is what comes back to my point on our journey. and this is the lessons that we've learned as an organisation, is you have to know what you're kind of looking to measure and deliver, and don't get too sidetracked in trying to boil the ocean and look at everything as a problem. Where do you want to start? How am I going to integrate that into how we operate? Because that's how you deliver business kind of risk reduction. That's how you deliver the actual value. And I give an example, is that we did a normal security testing exercise, and within 23 minutes we'd spotted the red team activity doing something that we expected not to be happening with that type of account at that time. And that is a really measurable, really obvious reduction. We wouldn't have done that if we didn't know exactly how account privilege access should be granted, if we didn't know exactly what we were monitoring, what we were looking for. We wouldn't have been able to just spot that as kind of routine and course. So for me, really, it's about making sure that you've got the project and the framework there. That means that you can continue to deliver and continue to kind of advance your business risk reduction. What I think it's very easy to do when we talk about what's the actual risk reduction that you're achieving here, is you try and do everything for everyone, and you need to really make sure actually what is deliverable, what can I get into operations, what can I can say is done and is kind of performing and addressing that risk.
That's a very good comprehensive answer. Absolutely nothing to be able to add on that one. So we'll come to our final question that I can see in. So just a reminder, if anyone has got any questions, feel free to post. We've probably got another couple of minutes or so. But the other question we've got, this one, how long was the project? Well, I think you've already answered some of that or most of that, if I'm completely honest, in the story. And what does it cost?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna necessarily say how much our project cost, but I think if the journey we've been on, it tells you that story, right? We started this, I think, 2017, 2018, and ultimately I still have a project component on PAM. Now, we've made different choices, different decisions on PAM and how we implemented it. But clearly, you need to invest and consider PAM for the long term. I think it's too easy, as I said early on, to think of PAM as a technical implementation, as you would any other kind of technical solution purchase, and immediately jump to a solution. And I think if you go in with that solution mindset of, I'm here to implement a technology, this is what I need to do, these are the people that will be changed by it, it's fine. You're not necessarily going to get the business value or the risk reduction that you perceive that or believe that you're getting. So for me, really, the cost or the project length is about really being cognizant of what you're doing and the business change program that effectively you're going on. You need to be setting yourself up for almost the long term, and that's why I defined it as a 3-year project, to really make sure actually we do not leave this as a partially complete and we'll finish some in BAU later on. The project will not disappear until I'm happy that all our use cases and objectives are delivered and the operational teams are happy and signing off that they're working and they're effective and can be supported. So for me, I think that the lesson really there, and perhaps the question behind that is, PAM is not necessarily a thing that you can just do in a year or in 6 months. You need to be thinking about long term. How do you integrate and sustain it?
No, that's a really good point, and probably final question. Looking at the time now, I've got, for some reason, in the distance, somebody shouting, "What's the ROI?" But I think we can leave that there and have that as a separate session later on. So just as we're wrapping up, I've just got to say a massive thank you to Matt for taking his time out to share the journey around PAM. I know it's going to be very useful to quite a lot of you who've tuned in, but thank you very much for sharing, and there's a lot of honesty in there and some good tips about avoiding. So I'm just going to start plugging the next few sessions that we've got coming up in Risky Business. So next, we're followed up by Carlsberg Group, essentially how to engage the non-SAP security teams and try to help to mature security across the SAP landscape. So that sounds like it's about breaking down the silos, so something that's close to my heart. The next, following on from that, we've got BP around managing SAP security risk management and compliance. That should be a good one to tune into as well. And then finally, bringing up for the final session of the day, range consulting, the calm seas of business change. So navigating risks, controls, and compliance on your journey to SAP S/4HANA. So I've been Cavan Arrowsmith. If you'd like to get in touch or have any further questions that you'd like to follow up on, then please feel free to get in touch. Drop anything into the Risky Business chat as well. A huge thank you again to Matt for taking time out to share the story. And hopefully Matt will be tuned in next time to take us through a live whiteboard that I can see behind him. So maybe that's the next challenge, hey, Matt? Thank you very much, though, and thanks, everyone.